people at the same time watching our house.
Well, welcome to my little garden here. It would just be a nice light program to have for the holiday potluck. So I did a little PowerPoint on my garden. So is this turn on or?
Oh, just press in the middle there, and then press right arrow to move it forward.
Okay.
And left arrow if you want to go back.
So if you have any questions about anything you see, just holler. So I've broken it up into the different geographical locations. So this is my north bed. It's just a small bed in the northwest corner. As you can see, my roses are almost all in pots. And you can see the whiskey barrels. There's some ceramics, but and they're all up on brick. So there's no invasive roots getting in there. But it's just so much easier to do things in containers because you control the soil mix. The fertilizer stays put, it doesn't run across if it's in a bed somewhere and not get down to the rows.
Wow.
So this is fabulous. This is a 1999 introduction by Keith Zeri. It's my favorite Floribunda. It's no longer in commerce, so if you can find it anywhere, but in the springtime, the sprays are so huge that I have to stake them up because they'll just hang over. And it wins lots of trophies for me. And it's just a nice, clean white. You see the petals are sort of reflects backwards, almost like not like a camellia, is that what it is?
Oh, yeah.
It looks sort of like that is what it reminds me of. Yeah, so, but very super clean foliage, almost never gets mildew. So really easy to go. So if you can find one, grab it.
Do you need any more cuttings?
I know, we might have to do some cuttings. St. Patrick, this is a 1996 introduction by Frank Strickland. It's a really good grower, it loves the heat, and it gets sort of a greenish tinge on the yellow. If it's grown in a lot of shade, it will be very green. So that's where they got the St. Patrick from. But it's a nice rose, and it's just so hardy. It's again, cast iron foliage, lots of substance. They've actually gotten a couple of other roses out of this. Falling in Love, Marilyn Monroe, those are out of St. Patrick. And then Lava Glute, that's German for lava flow or lava glow. This is from Cordis roses from 1978, so it's getting to be kind of an old rose. But it's the most crimson flowers, and it just has beautiful sprays, even in the fall. Usually Floribundas, you'll get good sprays in the springtime and like maybe single flowers in the fall. But this one consistently has excellent sprays. They're nice and tight, good inflorescence, and the color really has, it's non-fading. It's just beautiful crimson.
I just need to put the board on it like that.
Are they fragrant?
Not very much fragrance at all, but that does happen with a lot of roses. Sidonie is a French introduction. It's considered an old garden rose, 1845. Jean-Pierre Vibert of France. But it's got a beautiful quartering in it, very fragrant. Almost reminds you somewhat of a moss rose, where you get like the little crazy mosses on the buds. But it has a nice button eye. You can't really see it. It's not a very good picture of it, but it's considered a damask perpetual. And it gets about 4 or 5 feet, but it's a beautiful cut flower and extremely fragrant. So now we're at the east bed. So this is Madame Hardy. This is introduced in 1832 by Alexandre Hardy in Paris. He was sort of an amateur hybridizer. He worked at some of the gardens there, but this is probably my favorite old garden rose. It gets almost a little bit of a fleshy toned pink in it, and it has that green button eye, and it's very, very fragrant. Gets kind of big. Mine right now is almost 7 feet across, so and it only blooms in the spring, but it's a good rose to grow. You'll almost always win Dowager if you have a good Madam Hardy on the table. And Munstead Wood, you're going to find I'm growing a lot of David Austins. I like them for arrangements, and shrub roses are just so easy, and almost all of them are very fragrant. This one's about to go out of commerce, so if you can find one, they still are featuring it on the David Austin website. Buy it. It's a really nice rose. It's just look how deep that color is. You have the magenta on the outside, and it's almost like a velvety, dark reddish purple in the middle. It's very, very fragrant. I have it listed as a 3x3 bush, but mine, I have 2 of them, and they're getting to be about 6 feet across, so they're really taking off. Jubilee Celebration, another David Austin from 2002. This is a fairly compact bush, so it's pretty easy to tuck in somewhere if you like it. Very fragrant. And again, the raspberry and lemon, but it's really nice. And for arrangements, especially, I do a lot of Ikebana, Japanese style arrangement, and a lot of the David Austins resemble the peonies, and so they do lend very well to that style of arrangement. White Licorice, this is a 2011 from Christian Bernard out of Weeks Roses. It actually has a licorice scent, but it has that beautiful yellow wash in the center, and it's got great foliage. It's really a nice rose.
In the fall, it's very yellow.
Yes, it's when the cooler weather gets very yellow.
You wouldn't know that white was in its name, so.
Yeah. And that's how you should exhibit it, like fully open like that. You can see the nice fresh stamens, but it's a really good rose, and it's not a big ranging one. It's very compact, so I would really recommend that if you want to try it. Pat Austin, another David Austin. This is an older one from '95, named after his wife, but it was kind of a color breakthrough for him. That orange. You don't find typically in the old garden roses, but it has the old rose form and is very, very, very fragrant. David Austin's late wife was an accomplished sculptress, apparently, allegedly. Moonlight in Paris, this is fairly new. This one sometimes sold as a floribunda and sometimes as a shrub, but in the American Rose Society, it's shown as a shrub. Suzanne Horn had one at the Palm Desert show that puts mine to shame, but it won Best of Shrubs. And it was just beautiful, but very fragrant. You can see this rose is twice the size now. This is a pretty new rose, but it's getting big. And usually if you fertilize it heavy enough, you're going to get a lot more of the pinks and the yellows in it, and a lot more petals. So sometimes you need to let a rose mature. It usually takes about 3 years for a rose to get to maturity before it really hits its stride and you start kicking out some nice blooms. Brooks Red, this is discovered by Warren Brooks in 2000 and introduced by Johnny Becknell. This is one of the few roses I have that's in the ground. It's on the Fortuniana rootstock, and it's about 7 feet tall. It's a monster, but it's got beautiful color. You see there's a little bit of yellow down there in the reverse. It's not really red, it's more of like a dark, almost like a magenta, I would guess. But it's really a pretty rose. It's cast iron. It just will not shatter. I mean, you can shake it like this and it'll just hold its petals. If you can find it, get it. But it's getting really scarce. Arcanum, this is a miniature by Robbie Tucker. Beautiful foliage on it, and almost never get any mildew. I've won several trophies with it, but it's got a nice sort of I guess kind of almost a coral and cream color. Very little fragrance that I could detect, but a good exhibiting rose, and it's a good rose for lots of bloom. The Squire, this is a discontinued David Austin. It's one of his early reds. 1976 is pretty old for his roses. Not too much fragrance, although they say it is fragrant, but just beautiful, beautiful form. Does very well on the show tables. Suzanne Horn wins with this all the time in California, but you know, California is just, it's amazing how good their roses are when they have a Pacific Ocean nearby.
Why did they discontinue a rose?
They have new varieties that they've hybridized and they've got inventory of that they have to sell. I'm like tens of thousands of the newer editions that they're bringing. So they don't want their older roses competing against that because they've got to, you know, they got to liquefy or liquidate those roses that got, you know, waiting to go out. But since David Austin died, his son is really clamping down on who gets to sell David Austin roses, and he's pulling away from a lot of nurseries that they're not allowed to. K&M can't sell them anymore.
Oh.
And their roses were fantastic because on Fortuniana rootstock, the David Austins do great, but David Austin Jr. is really clamping down on stuff. I don't know why he's being such a jerk about it, but.
So he doesn't grow them on the Fortuniana?
Well, no, in England, I think, I don't know what kind of, if they use a rootstock or if they're on their own roots, but on their website, their roses come out of Texas, and I think they're either on their own roots or they're on, I think a multiflora is what they sell on, which is not the best rootstock for out here. We would mostly have Dr. Huey out here.
Right.
So, I don't know, you'd have to ask him why he's being persnickety. Lamarne, this is an old 1915, Barbier Frere and Compagnie in France. It's a nice little polyantha, always in bloom. It seems to love the heat, but has this very delicate pink and then it fades to that kind of a whitish cream. Beautiful sprays, very healthy grower. Belstory, this is probably my favorite rose. This is a 1984 that's no longer in commerce, but it's just such a great rose for the West. It gets good form and has a beautiful myrrh scent. It's just, you know, not a real full thing, but very cupped, but it's probably one of his masterpieces, I'd say. And I don't think that's a very good example of it. It could really be much more spectacular than that one there. But yeah, it's a good one. Molyneux, another David Austin, another nice deep yellow. It's a good show rose. You've got to cut it pretty tight because it will shatter if you're taking it to a show. But again, very fragrant, and that color is just spectacular. Beautiful in arrangements. So it's getting ready to go away too. And I noticed they are offering it at David Austin, so if you're going to get one, I would get one now. Very nice rose, very compact. And so we changed it up with a little clematis. This is a 12 Violette. It's from 1885, but it loves the heat. It's one of the few clematis that just goes gaga in our climate. And I chop this thing down to with an inch of its life. And every spring it does this. It gets up to about 10 to 15 feet. Yeah, and it's just like solid purple. But if you want to try growing clematis, they do very well in containers. You do want to put mulch around them because they like hot heads and cool feet. And they're pretty heavy feeders too, but they're a beautiful vine. If you go to Brushwood Nursery out of Georgia, they have a great collection of clematis. You know, now's the time to get them. So this is Hannah Gordon. This is another Cordis rose from '83. Shows up on the show tables a lot. It's just a really easy grower. This one's on Fortuniana, so it's a bit of a monster. The Fortunianas tend to get a little bit bigger, but it's just got that beautiful, you know, deep pinkish edging on there. But a great show rose. Princess Alexandra of Kent, 2007 David Austin. This one likes room. This thing's about 6 or 7 feet across, but it's just, I mean, just as a bloom machine. Very fragrant and nice long stems. Great for just cutting a bouquet and just bringing it in the house. It just will perfume the whole house. And now the south bed.
Oh my God, Terry.
Out of control. Paul Ecke Jr. This was done by Tom Caruth for Weeks Roses. This particular plant, I was visiting friends in Cerritos, California, and they knew I grew a lot of roses. So like, well, we want to go to the nursery, and can you plant some roses for us? I'm like, yeah, sure. So we go down to Armstrong Nursery, and this was probably in November. Well, in those days, this is like maybe 20 years ago, they would mark down all their roses and get rid of their inventory because they were getting ready for all the winter plants and whatnot. So we were picking on a pink rose for my friend Kathy, and she says, well, that's not quite the pink I want. I said, well, let's look at this rose. And so we looked around, and then off in the distance I see this flower, and I couldn't believe the color. And so I went and bought it, and I smuggled it home on the Southwest Airlines. I chopped it down, wrapped it up. They didn't say a word. As long as it was going out of California, they didn't care. And that's the rose. And I brought it down to, I think it was the West Valley Rose Show, and I put it in the judges class, and they just went gaga. They sent a caravan over to California to get every Paul Ecke Jr. they could. But it's got this beautiful, it's almost like a tangerine center and like a smoky orange on the outside. It's just a great, great color. And that photo really doesn't do it justice.
It's named after Paul Ecke, who was the guy that hybridized and developed a lot of the poinsettias that you see at Christmas time. He was in Encinitas, California. They even have a Paul Ecke Drive in Encinitas, California. He was one of the main hybridizers of poinsettias, and the ones that they could grow without having to cover them in the dark and trick them into thinking it was springtime. So
He actually introduced it as like a house plant.
yeah.
So now you see them everywhere, poinsettias, but back in those days, you didn't see them that much, did you?
No.
So Daybreaker, this is the one I just dug up. It's really a beautiful rose. It's got beautiful foliage, but but roses are short-lived in my garden. If they don't do what I want them to, they either given away or thrown away. So this one's being given away, but it's a good show rose. It doesn't spray hardly at all, but it does get up on the table for single for abundant bloom, and the color is really nice. So, Casino, this is an old 1963 from Samuel McGreedy. He was a great hybridizer in Ireland. This I got from a cutting from the boys that used to live here. Oh God, now I can't think of their name.
But that was their names, collectively.
Yeah, the boys, I always just call them the boys. But this thing got 12 feet across, and it's just really fragrant. But look at the blooms. I mean, it's sort of.
I have his brother on the greenhouse.
Yeah, she got one of the cuttings too.
Did.
But yeah, it's a great rose. But like I said, you got to give it room. So, but very, very fragrant. But hard to find here. So, if I do cuttings, you guys let me know if you want one. Out of the Blue, another Tom Caruth, but it's got this crazy blue in the purple. And you can tell how the different colors are right there. This thing gets big, it's easily 6 feet across, so it's a bit of a monster. But it's very fragrant, and it's just a spectacular color. It does very nice sprays, it's considered a shrub rose. But you gotta give it some room. Stainless steel, we were talking about this one earlier. This was a new and improved sterling silver, which is not a very good rose to grow, very difficult to grow. But stainless steel is one of my favorites. And you just see that beautiful, the buds have that, like that sort of magenta, and then it opens up to that lavender, and very fragrant. It's a good rose to grow. Crescendo, this is one of the newer hybrid teas from Keith Zeri. This is very fragrant rose, but it can get like that darker shade too. But it's a cross out of Gemini and New Zealand. But if you want a fragrant rose, this is a good one to get. Queen of Elegance, this is new from Tom Cruise. This is 2020. That's a little small bush right now, but it's gotten quite big. But very fragrant, again, that old form. Sort of it's kind of an unusual color. It's almost like a silver lavender, I would say, and then there's like that pink middle of it. Doris Day, one of my favorite actresses. So I had to get this one. But it's like, I think it's better than Julia Child. I think it has a stronger yellow, and it's easier to prune. Julia Child has almost no bud eyes to prune to. Doris Day is very easy to prune. And very ruffled. And it's actually a child of Julia Child and Julie Newmar. Adiso, this is a 2007 Michael Williams. I just love the color. It's a nice mini, but it gets just real intense shade. Considered a red blend. Good show form, but no fragrance. But it's starting to get big. It's in a whiskey barrel, but already it's like 4 feet high. So I think it's going to be a baby monster. And Conundrum, this is a Robbie Chugger from 2001. Doesn't have a lot of petals, so when you want to show it, you got to cut it fairly tight. But it does have really good color to it. But it's very prone to mildew. So if you're going to grow it to show it, you're going to have to spray a fungicide on it. And Gertrude Jekyll, this is probably my most fragrant rose. It's an old David Austin again, but it's really a climber. They call it Galloping Gertie because it will get to 12 feet across. But it's super fragrant. Blooms very heavily in the spring. If you prune it hard enough in the fall, it will do that again, but it blooms much lighter in the fall. I think it's old garden rose parentage is probably what causes that to happen, but just this beautiful pink and just super, super fragrant. In fact, it won the best fragrance at our last show. And the West Bed. This is Fired Up. It's a 2013 from the House of Mayenne in France. But it's a color changer. It gets very yellow, and then it goes to orange, and then it goes to like a deep smoky orange.
And it is striped.
And it's striped. I don't think any fragrance, but it's great in arrangements, and it's a beautiful plant in the garden. Just the colors are just wacky. And then Sexy Rexy is another Sam McGree. It's a really good floribunda. Good sprays in the spring. You get a lot of good single blooms in the fall, but very good foliage, and it's a proven show winner. But it just has a nice form. It reminds me a little bit of Fabulous too. So I don't know if there's some of it into Fabulous, but see how the petals come. You can't see as much there, but they tend to reflect back. And there you have it. Thank you.